Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, a homeowner association swing set almost killed my son and a bar collapsed on his head. I made sure to not let them get away with this. Let's dive right into the video. And the first HOA story starts like this. I always knew that an HOA could be evil or negligent with the money we give them, but them not caring about the safety of the residents was not something I could predict. I can now, obviously, but back when my kid was 10, his life was ruined forever because of my HOA. One thing we have in our community is a playground. It was built as a way to keep our kids safe and avoid needing to play in the streets. It's a large area with an open field and then the generic playground amenities. And it was close enough that we could just walk a couple of blocks and be there without needing to make a big plan of a day out. I had taken him 100 times before this day, so to me it didn't seem like anything special. He loved the swings, and when he saw that the place was not busy and they were empty, he was thrilled to run and sit down on it. As soon as he sat, I heard the bar above him snap and then the sound of his scream as it smashed right into him. It went straight down onto his head and face. My entire body went cold as I just saw him injured on the ground and silent. I was scared to even check if he was breathing and called an ambulance in hysterics. They came to get him and we went to the hospital. In that moment it was all about my son and trying to make sure that he was gonna be okay. He needed about 5 surgeries because of the damage the metal bar did. His skull was fractured and he had a concussion, broken nose, broken eye socket, etc. Our biggest concern was potential damage to his brain that we would not even know until he woke up. He did end up having some brain damage, but thank God not too severe. However, his entire life was never gonna be the same after that point. He was blind in one eye and had constant complaints about his head or face hurting him. School, which he loved now, was torture for him due to not being able to follow along in class and the noise around him causing even more headaches. We made the decision to pull him out and get him private homeschooling with tutors that could work with his problems. His short-term memory is horrible even after all these years. It was not until the shock of everything calmed down that I even bothered to ask myself why the bar fell on him. I went to the HOA and talked to them about the equipment being broken and asking about the last time they had it checked out. They avoided everything I asked and instead started to turn it around on me, saying that I was just looking for a lawsuit in order to pay the medical bills. That it was probably his fault and they don't have to tell me anything. They legally didn't, so I got a lawyer who would get the answers either from them or dig up the information themselves. So what followed was a 2-year lawsuit and investigation that showed how badly the HOA effed up doing this. You can be sure I was suing them and looking for a ton of money, but it wasn't just about paying for my son's medical bills. His entire life was ruined and he will never be able to live alone without help. Nobody should be able to just walk away from that if they are the ones responsible. Before things went to trial, my lawyer was able to get a bunch of useful information. The fact that the equipment was over a year overdue to be checked out and that the last time it was inspected, the report to the HOA said that the parts needed to be maintained better and probably need to be replaced within 6 months. And they had no argument against it being their responsibility to maintain that park and everything in it because our HOA dues pay for it. Suddenly, now that this information was known, they were trying hard to offer a settlement to us. A small amount of money that didn't mean a damn thing, but to make matters worse, when my lawyer told them to shut down the park until it could be maintained properly, they refused. We had to get police involved in order to get the place shut down. It was not safe and there could have easily been more accidents, but they did not care. I was not taking a settlement. I wanted to take them to court where they would have to actually claim responsibility. I won't repeat everything we had on them, but I will tell you the excuses they felt like bringing up. Trying to say that a 10-year-old boy is bound to play rough and if the equipment is misused, it can always be broken. They tried to paint my son as some gremlin and me as an irresponsible mom that was not watching her son. As if I already didn't blame myself enough and wished that I was standing closer and be able to pull him away in time. Then their lawyer tried to argue that just because something broke doesn't mean that it was their fault. Things break and accidents happen. That doesn't mean that you need to make a lawsuit out of things. Everything they said was just clouded over by the lack of inspections or care for safety. I think one comment that really swayed anybody were 2 things. The first talking about my son's injuries and the lifelong problems he will have because of this incident that could and should have been avoided by the HOA. The second talking about the fact that right next to that swing set was another one designed for babies and had the exact same type of bar overhead. If that one had broken, then the trial would be a lot more than what happened to my son. In fact, the entire park's equipment was inspected as part of the whole thing, and found that pieces were rusted out or had screws or bolts just missing. It was gross negligence on the part of the HOA, and the court agreed on that fact. They were ordered to pay us $20 million, a sum that if most people won in court they would be jumping up and down, but for me I was just glad that they were found at fault and held accountable. I knew that amount of money would bankrupt them and cause the neighborhood to lose their HOA together. Meaning losing the park and the gym that was funded by them. I didn't care about any of that, only about my son and the future he would have. He's a teenager now, and while some things like the scars are healed, there's always that reminder. Nights where I hold him because he cannot sleep from the pain, revision surgeries and scans, and the fact that I don't have to worry about his medical bills or being taken care of is a huge burden off of me. Honestly, HOAs need more oversight from the local government. Something to stop them from having this situation happen in the first place. Making HOAs pay or getting revenge on them is all well and good, but honestly, I think there needs to be some big change to stop it from being an issue at all. And you can be sure that in all of these years I've not been sitting on my thumbs. Instead, I was contacting every member of my local government to put things in place and take control away from HOAs. And the next one is titled "No Good Deed Goes Unpunished with HOAs." So this has been developing over the last 6 weeks or so, when an elderly woman, her friend and her handicapped niece moved into the house beside us. Things started off interesting, but the women all seemed nice enough. The wife and I were finishing up a movie at around 11 PM when we heard something at the side of our house. It sounded like someone was trying to get through our side gate into the backyard. Upon investigating, I saw that someone was trying to get in. Our new neighbors had just driven into town and were confused about which side gate was theirs and were attempting to open our locked gate. I helped them get into their own yard. Their real estate agent had left their key in the backyard and helped them move their bags into their house. I got to meet the 3 women who were moving in and realized that they were in no shape to be moving heavy things around the house. The new owner, Candy, not her real name, but her real name is still a stripper's name, so I think it works, is in her 70s and gets around with a cane. Her friend, I believe that they are romantically involved, but we live in the South, so I think she's accustomed to not saying so explicitly, gets around with a walker, and the niece is in her 50s and is quite severely mentally handicapped. Seeing this, I offered to help them move anything that the movers had misplaced. Candy was mentioning that some items were in the wrong rooms, but that I had to be getting home soon and would be back tomorrow to help. I arrived at their place around 8 the next night after getting our kids to bed and just moved all their boxes from the garage into the correct rooms. Not a big deal. The real issue was that they had some large pieces of furniture that were misplaced and I did not have a dolly to move them around on my own. At this point, Candy and her friend were being extremely thankful and polite, so I told the women that I would be more than happy to snag one from a friend on the way home from work tomorrow and could help move the rest of the stuff, and that I would be over at about the same time. Well, work the next day turned into a complete dumpster fire. I ended up having to stay at work until a bit after midnight to get everything done that needed to be done. When I got home, I wrote a note explaining what had happened and that I would still be willing to help move things when I got off work tomorrow. After this, I never had another good experience with them. I went over the next day and asked if they had seen my note, and Candy said, "Because you flaked, I had to hire someone to do this for me." I was completely taken aback as this was a complete reversal from her original demeanor. 2 days later, Candy had someone setting up internet, and as these are all new constructions, a new line had to be buried. The box which the line connected into for Candy's house and our own was a couple of feet on our side of the property line. As this was done on a Saturday, I was home while the line was being buried and asked the installer to run the line on the neighbor's side of the property line until he could turn into the box. Neighbors had told him to run it along our pavers leading to the backyard, about 2 feet over our property line. Well, I'm sure he didn't realize that he was on our property, but Candy did. The next week we got hit with a fine from our HOA for leaving dirt from work on our property and our neighbor's lawn. Going outside, I saw that there was a small amount of sand right around where the buried line came into the box on our property, and when I explained to the HOA that this was caused by the installation of the neighbor's cable, the fine was dropped. Clearly, Candy had called this in, which really pissed me off, but she would not come to the door when I was knocking to talk to her about it. Small things like this kept happening. I'd go out and our recycling was full as it takes a few weeks to get your bin delivered, so Candy just threw her stuff in ours. We had an HOA inspector come over to assess unauthorized permanent structures on our property. These structures were a trampoline, which is not considered permanent by the HOA, and a small play structure, which is, however, we applied with the HOA to install that one. Well, she has escalated things over the last couple of weeks. The Monday before last, we had a crew coming in to install solar panels on our home. While this was being done, the cops showed up as someone had called in that people were breaking onto our property and trying to get through our back door. The cops were cool and said that someone must have just been confused about what was going on, and I informed them of the issues that we were having with our neighbor, but they didn't say much about it and didn't do anything. I was out with the installers working in the yard. There was no way that anyone could reasonably believe that people were breaking into our home. Once again, we had an inspector called on us to check out an unapproved modification to our roof, the solar panels that we paid $400 to the HOA to install, and on Sunday the cops showed up again, and this time it was much more serious. The call they had gotten this time was that our children were locked in our backyard in the heat, that my 2-year-old was out there naked, and that they were screaming to be let back in. Basically, that we were being accused of abusing our own children. Thankfully, the screaming was still going on when the cops arrived, as my 2-year-old was squealing and laughing, running through the sprinklers. It took a little longer to assuage the cops this time, and they told me that I probably should have my daughter in a swimsuit next time. Due to the nature of this call, they did speak with the neighbor afterwards. Candy feigned ignorance and said that her handicapped niece must have placed the call. The niece is almost completely non-verbal, so this was clearly BS, but I don't think that the cops wanted to deal with this and talked with us one more time, explaining their conversation with Candy before heading out. Not really sure what we can do at this point. I submitted a complaint to the HOA, but I don't think that is gonna do anything, and I'm not sure if this has progressed to criminal harassment yet, but I'm sure this is far from over. Update: the neighbor on the opposite side of Candy, let's call her Katie, has been getting some work done on her home, including the installation of a sunroom. At 6 AM on Sunday, Candy made her way into Katie's backyard through the normally locked side gate and went into the sunroom to look around. Katie was notified by her security system that someone was on her property, so she called the cops. Candy was gone by the time the cops arrived, and Katie did not recognize her, but Candy's return to her property was caught on our Ring camera. The commotion next door got us up, and my wife checked our notifications. Katie had the cops issue a trespass to Candy, and we requested that they also inform Candy that she was not welcome on our property either. The cops told us it would be criminal trespass if she does so after being warned. We reached out to a local security company regarding getting cameras on the sides and back of our home. The quote is a bit out of our budget, so we'll be looking around for more options, but we'll definitely be installing them. I know we can save a ton of money by setting up our own system, but the wife hates exposed wires, and it's definitely out of my capacity to do something she would find acceptable. Update to the story: Candy's antics continued, making our lives miserable. But we were determined not to let her win. We finally found an affordable security system that met our needs and installed cameras around our property. This gave us peace of mind and a way to document any further incidents. About a week later though, we received another fine from the HOA. This time it was for a supposed unapproved garden structure that didn't even exist. I had enough. I gathered all the documentation of Candy's false reports, the police visits, and the fines we received due to her baseless complaints. I presented this to the HOA board during their next meeting, detailing the harassment we had endured. I was not alone. Katie also shared her experience with Candy trespassing on her property. Our combined testimonies were compelling. The board agreed to put Candy on notice for her actions and informed her that any further false reports would result in fines against her and possible legal action. Things seemed to calm down for a while, but Candy couldn't help herself. She made another false report to the HOA, claiming that we were building an unauthorized shed. This time, the HOA fined her for harassment and issued a formal warning. Not long after, we noticed a for sale sign in Candy's yard. It was a huge relief. When she finally moved out, we felt like a dark cloud had lifted from our lives. The new neighbors were a friendly young couple who quickly became friends with us and Katie. They even invited us over for a barbecue to celebrate their move-in. In the end, we didn't just survive Candy's harassment, we thrived. Our community stood by us and we strengthened our bond with our other neighbors. We now enjoy our home and neighborhood without the constant stress of false accusations and petty complaints. Our children play freely in the yard and we have resumed our peaceful evenings. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I live in this little known corner of Southeast Asia where our neighborhood is like a cozy little nook in a small city. It's mostly filled with sweet parents and grandparents whose kids have moved away to study or work in bigger countries. In early 2020, something new came into the picture, this thing called the Homeowners Association, HOA. I know that these HOAs are fairly common in the Western world, but they are definitely less known around here, although you find them in some cities and they are gaining popularity. People started talking about it and trying to get us to join. They claimed it would bring all sorts of benefits to our neighborhood. Well, the timing was interesting because I had just finished college and, thanks to the pandemic, I had to come back home in March 2020. My parents live in another country, so I stayed with my grandma who had blood cancer and was undergoing treatment. We were super paranoid about the virus, so being together seemed like the safest option. Curiosity got the best of me and I decided to find out more about this HOA thing. Turns out it's a group of volunteer homeowners who take charge of things like fixing up the common spaces, organizing events and making sure everyone follows the rules in the neighborhood. Seemed alright at first, you know, a way to improve our neighborhood and make it even better. But here is where things took a turn. These people started making these crazy rules and regulations that did not make any sense. Suddenly, we were told we would have to have specific picket fences, and if we hung our laundry outside, we would get slapped with a fine. It was like living in a neighborhood run by a bunch of control freaks. Let me tell you about the head boss of this crazy HOA, the president, aka a woman in her 30s who had all the traits of a classic Karen in her own Asian way, of course. She thought she knew it all and did not waste a single opportunity to tell us how backwards our community was. According to her, we needed to get with the times, which basically meant blindly following her every command. She went around preaching to everyone, pressuring them to join the HOA and sign this document that had more rules than a physics book. I mean, seriously, it covered everything from taking out the trash to where we could park our cars. Some smart parents saw through her nonsense and declined her offers, but the poor old folks were easily manipulated into signing on the dotted line. Luckily, I was there to stand my ground and say no thanks to all their HOA shenanigans. But whenever I had to leave the house, I had a virtual internship at the time, but occasionally I had to go out into the office despite the ongoing pandemic. This HOA Karen would show up at our door trying to sweet-talk my grandma into signing those damn documents. Let me tell you, my grandma was no pushover. She saw right through Karen's act and would send her packing with her own sweet talk. However, when Karen realized her charm offensive was not working, she resorted to dirty tricks. She somehow found out that my grandma was not a fan of our neighbor's dogs, so she thought she could strike a deal. Karen offered to get rid of the dogs if my grandma signed the papers. Well, my grandma was having none of it. Sure, she might get annoyed by the noisy barks, but she would never want to forcibly remove those dogs from their homes. So Karen's little deal backfired big time. Not one to give up easily, Karen started recruiting other HOA members to convince my grandma. It was like watching a reality TV show, but in our neighborhood. The whole thing turned into chaotic mess. I was at work dealing with database issues and out of the blue, I get a frantic call from my grandma. She is sobbing and that instantly sends me into panic mode. Through her tears, she manages to tell me that the HOA Karen had evicted her from her own home. My grandma tried to reason with Karen, but this heartless woman had some documents in hand, a will supposedly written by my grandma. The only problem was my grandma insisted she had not written any damn will. According to this forged document, Karen was now the rightful owner of my grandma's house. And to top it all off, she had my grandma kicked out during a frickin' pandemic. You can imagine the rage that surged through me. I was seething with anger like never before. If I was not such a decent person, I swear I would have rounded up a group of people to teach Karen and her minions a lesson they would never forget. But alas, I had to think straight, so I quickly called up a friend who knew about the law and spilled the whole story as I rushed back home. My friend insisted that I speak to my grandma first before involving the police. So I headed straight to our kind neighbor's house where my grandma sought refuge. She was in tears, crying nonstop and apologizing to me of all people. It broke my heart to see her blaming herself for something that was not her fault. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to see Karen rotting in the filthiest jail cell. After consoling my grandma, I asked her if she had signed any papers from the HOA recently. She said she hadn't, but a few days ago a little girl had come knocking on our door asking for signatures for some school carnival. My grandma, in her innocence, accidentally used her go-to signature for official documents. Little did she know the trouble it would cause. I assured her not to worry and tucked her into bed, thanking our neighbors for their kindness. Then I reached out to my friend again. He provided me with the contact info of a cop who was known for being fair, unlike those easily swayed by Karen's money. I wasted no time and called up the officer explaining the entire situation. All I had to do now was wait. When the police finally showed up, it was a real spectacle. There stood Karen with her gang of minions right in front of my house, wearing a smug grin as if she already had the victory in her pocket. Even though I was the one who called the cops, Karen had the audacity to approach the officer and start spewing lies about me, calling me a scammer, a fraud, you name it. But thankfully, the cop had enough sense to ask her to wait while he came to talk to me. I handed over the forged documents and gave the officer a detailed account of everything my grandma had shared with me. He then requested Karen to present the documents she had in her possession. He also took a statement from my grandma and collected her signature. The cop assured us that he would be confiscating the documents to investigate them for forgery. Oh, but the drama did not stop there. Karen, in a desperate attempt to save her own skin, pulled the officer to the side. I did not need to see it to know she was trying to bribe him, but it didn't work. The cop warned her that her actions could be used against her in court. Karen's face fell as the police drove away, and I could see the frustration boiling inside her. I knew she wanted to unleash her threats once again, but I swiftly ushered my grandma inside and shut the door on her face. Our wonderful neighbors offered us their support, allowing us to stay with them until this mess could be sorted out. Thankfully, it did not take long. The documents were proven to be forged and Karen was arrested. She tried to put on a brave face, threatening to take the matter to court. In response to that, I decided to sue her and the entire HOA. As the court case unfolded, the truth about the HOA's wrongdoings came to light. The whole association was ordered to disband and Karen received a hefty fine and a prison sentence for masterminding this entire debacle. It was a sight to behold seeing Karen wail and cry in the courtroom as her punishment was announced. I could not help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that the person who caused my grandma so much pain would now be locked away for years. During the course of the legal battle, my parents arrived and they offered my grandma the option to move in with them. However, my grandma had grown attached to her house and I could not bear to leave her behind. So I volunteered to stay in the city and continue working at the firm where I had been interning. It might not be the highest paying job, but being close to my grandma was more important to me than anything else. Sadly, my grandma passed away peacefully in 2021, but I continued to live in her cherished home, now with my wife by my side, awaiting the arrival of our first child. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripestories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again tomorrow.